Hi, good day. I am Rashida Ahmad and I will be presenting the nature of approaches and methods of language teaching. Before we start, let's take a glimpse of the outline of the discussion. First is the introduction. Second, the definition of the terms approach, method, and technique. Third is the approach. Under approach, I will be sharing about the different theories of language learning. Fourth is the design. Fifth is the procedure, sixth is the conclusion, and lastly, the references used in the presentation. Let's begin. Despite the changing status of approaches and methods in language teaching, the study of past and present teaching methods continues to form a component of many teacher preparation programs. And there are several reasons why, because the study of approaches and methods provides teachers with a view of how the field of language teaching has evolved and forms part of the disciplinary knowledge expected of language teachers today, introduces teachers to the issues and options that are involved in planning and developing a language course, and introduces a variety of principles and procedures that teachers can review and evaluate in relation to their own knowledge, beliefs, and practices. So the aims of my presentation have been made in order to conceptualize the nature of method, to explore more systematically the relationship of theory and practice within a method and the relationship of approach and a method. So in an attempt to clarify the differences of the terms, a scheme was proposed by the American applied linguist, namely Edward Mason Anthony in 1963. He identified three levels of conceptualization, which he termed approach, method, and technique. Remember, the arrangement is hierarchical. The organizational key is that techniques carry out a method which is consistent with an approach. What is approach, by the way? Approach is a set of correlative assumptions dealing with the nature of language teaching and learning. In other words, it describes the nature of the subject matter to be taught. Approach is the level at which assumptions and beliefs about a language and language learning are specified. And how do we specify it? It's by identifying theories, philosophies of proponents, or what we call the models. So according to Edward Anthony, an approach is axiomatic. What is axiomatic? It's like a framework which can be verified within a preference of modeling. And what are these models? Later on, I will present the 7 models of theories of language. Now, method accordingly is an overall plan for the orderly presentation of language material. To concretize the idea, if an approach is axiomatic, this time the method is procedural. Method is the level at which theory is put into practice and at which choices are made about the particular skills to be taught, the content to be taught, and the order in which the content will be presented. Techniques. If approach is axiomatic, method is procedural, now techniques are implementational, which actually takes place inside the classroom. What are these? These are particular tricks, stratagem, or a contrivance used to accomplish an immediate objective. In simplest term, your teaching strategies that you incorporate in the classroom is the technique. So take note, classroom techniques or teaching strategies must be consistent with a method. Again, the overall plan for the orderly presentation of your teaching material and therefore in harmony with the approach. So it must go hand in hand. Let's head now to the approach. Following Edward Anthony, approach refers to the theories about the nature of language and language learning that serve as the source of practices and principles in language teaching. In other words, it refers to the philosophy or the belief system that a method reflects. Let's have first the different theories of language. Language is a very complex phenomenon and is studied from the perspective of various disciplines like linguistics, literature, psychology, and many more. Here we will briefly review models of language that have influenced language teaching methods and approaches. This includes the first one, cognitive model. A cognitive view of language is based on the idea that language reflects the properties of the mind. So, Atkinson of 2011 identifies a number of core features and assumptions of a cognitive view of language or cognitivism. The first idea, according to him, mind is like a computer. It has a set of operations that take in input, process it, and produce output, just like a computer. The second idea is representationalism. Representationalism, or the processes that the mind engages in to store internal representation of external events. And the third idea is learning as abstract knowledge acquisition, or the abstracting the rules of the competence that underlies linguistic performance, as Noam Chomsky put it. So in Chomsky's theory of universal grammar, or the UG, that was first proposed in 1980s, is a well-developed example of a cognitive model of language. According to UG theory, the universal grammar theory, our minds contain a mental grammar that consists of universal principles that are common to all languages and parameters that vary according to different languages. Another way of conceptualizing language, and one that has a wide application in language teaching, is the structural view. The view that language is a system of structurally related elements for the coding of meaning. The target of language learning is seen to be the mastery of the elements of this system, which are generally defined in terms of phonological units, the phonemes, grammatical units, the clauses, phrases, and sentences, grammatical operations, lexical terms or lexical items, the functional words or structured words. Next is the view that language is a vehicle for the expression of functional meanings and for performing real-world activities. So functional models of language are linked to the concept of communicative competence, knowing how language is used to achieve different kinds of communicative purposes. Yet, another perspective on language can be called the interactional view. So it sees the language as a vehicle for the realization. A functional model is the vehicle for expression. Interactional view is the vehicle for realization of interpersonal relations and for the performance of social transactions between individuals. In other words, language is seen as a tool for the creation and maintenance of social relations. Interactional theories focus on the patterns of moves, acts, negotiation, and interaction found in conversational and other kinds of exchanges, which are central to an understanding of discourse. So if you're wondering what is the difference of functional model from interactional model, well, the communicative movement in language teaching in functional model subscribes to the view of language as the competency-based language teaching, while interactional model subscribes to the task-based language teaching. So, a related view of language is referred to as a social cultural model. Social cultural theory views language as a communicative activity in which the social context is central. Knowledge is constructed through social interaction with others and reflects the learner's culture, customs, and beliefs, as well as the collaborative activities people are engaged in. Another functional model of language is the genre-based approach. Genre refers to an area of human activity where there are norms of language usage, such as in science, business, medicine, and literature. Texts are the unit of discourse that occur in different genres, such as narratives, descriptions, and explanations. And lastly, the lexical view of language that prioritizes the role of lexis and lexical chunks or phrases in language and highlights the interrelatedness of grammar and vocabulary. Rather than seeing lexis and grammar as discrete, they are viewed as being intrinsically related. So linguists suggest that grammatical competence arises out of a phrase and lexically based learning and argue for a greater role for vocabulary as well as lexical phrases and chunks in language teaching. Let's move on to the theories of learning. Although specific theories of the nature of language may provide the basis for a particular teaching method, all methods reflect either explicitly or implicitly a theory of language learning. Language learning theories account for cognitive, personal, interpersonal, and social processes learners make use in second language learning. So let's have the first one, the behaviorism. This theory was based on the view that learning is a process in which specific behaviors are acquired in response to the specific stimuli. Correct responses are reinforced and increase the chance of the behavior becoming learned by Skinner of 1957. So how do you reinforce your students? Is it by telling them praises or rewarding them with good points? Cognitive code learning. This view was developed in 1960s as an alternative to behaviorism and emphasized that language learning is a cognitive process depending on both deductive and inductive learning as well as meaningful practice. So example are, students are taught grammatical rules which then they apply in practice. Learning is seen to depend on cognitive processing and mental effort. So the next is creative construction hypothesis. This theory first proposed in 1970s but still implicit in current theories of second language acquisition. It suggests that the learning is not simply a question of reproducing input but a creative process that has common features regardless of the learner's language background. So, grammatical errors accordingly are seen as evidence of learning rather than signs of faulty learning. Next is skill learning. Skills are integrated sets of behaviors that are learned through practice, right? Skill learning theory suggests that complex uses of language are made up of hierarchy of skills. Initially, skills are often consciously managed and directed by the learner, such as learning how to make a class presentation in English. Next is interactional theory. This theory argues that learning is an interactive process and depends on learners working together to achieve mutual understanding. Constructivism is another learning theory that has had a powerful influence on education and on theories of second language learning. It draws on the work of Jean Piaget and John Dewey, child development, as well as on the work of Lev Vygotsky. So, knowledge does not exist independently on the meaning constructed from experience by the learner or community of learners. Constructivism emphasizes that learners are actively involved in their own process of learning. Sociocultural learning theory, also known as social constructivism. This theory can be seen as an extension of both constructivism and interactional theory and views language learning as resulting from a dialogue between a learner and a more knowledgeable other person. So, the term sociocultural means that learning takes place in a particular social setting, just like the classroom, in which there are interaction between people, the teachers and the students, the objects, for example, the books, the textbooks, and culturally organized activities and events, or the instructional acts or the instructional activities. So learning is a process of a guided participation mediated through the direction of a more knowledgeable other person. So the best example is scaffolding. So in the classroom, scaffolding is the process of interaction between two or more people as they carry out a classroom activity wherein one person, the teacher, or another learner has more advanced knowledge than the other, the learner. So during the process, interaction proceeds as a kind of joint problem-solving activity between the teacher and student. So there is a collaborative dialogue which scaffolds the learning process by initially providing support and gradually removing that support as learning develops. Finally, individual factors. These are attributes individual learners bring to language learning that can also have an important influence of learning. So this includes learning style preferences, such as whether a learner likes to learn in groups or prefers learning alone. The affective factors such as shyness, the anxiety, enthusiasm, and other emotions that language learning may elicit and that may influence the learner's willingness to communicate. The motivation, which refers to the learner's attitude, the desire, the interest, and willingness to invest effort in learning second language. And learning strategies, the ways in which learners plan, manage, and evaluate their own learning. So for example, monitoring their own language development over time and identifying areas that need additional effort and improvement is a learning strategy. So there often appear to be natural affinities between certain theories of language and theories of language learning. Teachers may, for example, develop their own teaching procedures informed by a particular view of language and particular theory of learning. So they may constantly revise, vary, and modify teaching learning procedures on the basis of the performance of the learners and their reactions to the instructional practice. So a group of teachers holding similar beliefs about language and language learning, sharing similar approaches or theories, may each implement these principles in different ways. So approach does not specify procedure. Theory does not dictate a particular set of teaching techniques and activities. What links theory with practice is what we have called or is what we call the design. So in order for an approach to lead a method, it is necessary to develop a design for an instructional system. Design is the level of method analysis in which we consider first what the objectives of a method are, how language content is selected and organized within a method that is the syllabus model the method incorporates, the types of learning tasks and teaching activities the method advocates, the roles of learners, the roles of teachers, and the role of the instructional materials. So for objective, that is, they determine what learning outcomes a method sets out to achieve. Syllabus. Traditionally, the term syllabus has been used to refer to the form in which linguistic material is specified in a course or a method. So for example, in classes for young learners, concrete topics are likely to be introduced before the abstract ones, definitely. With adults, course topics related to immediate needs are likely to precede than those related to other issues. So, types of learning and teaching activities. These are attained through instructional process, through the organized, directed interaction of teachers, learners, the materials in the classroom. So, for example, the interactive games, dialogues, drills, question and answer, responding to commands, group problem solving, information exchange activities, task work, test analysis, role plays, simulations. So, next is the emergence of learner-centered approaches to the teaching. In 1980s, redefined the role of the learner. So, rather than being a passive recipient of teaching, learners were assigned much more power and autonomy in learning, and the great diversity of learners was acknowledged. So, next is the design of an instructional system will be considerably influenced by how learners are regarded. So, a method reflects explicit or implicit responses to questions concerning the learner's contribution to the learning process. So, this is seen in the types of activities learners carry out and the view of the learner as a processor, can be performer, an initiator, problem solver, or other. So, our students learn in different ways, right? That they can learn from a variety of different sources and that they may have different goals and objectives in language learning. So learner roles in an instructional system are closely linked to the teacher's roles and function. So some methods are totally dependent on teacher as a source of knowledge and direction. Others see the teacher's role as a catalyst, a consultant, a guide, and model for learning. So the role of the teacher for example, in a cooperative language learning requires teachers who are confident enough to step back from a teacher-fronted teaching to adopt the role of a facilitator. So the last component within the level of design concerns the role of instructional materials within the instructional system. What is specified with respect to objectives, content, the syllabus, the learning activities, the learner, and the teacher goals suggests that the function core materials within the system. So the syllabus defines the linguistic content in terms of language elements, the structure, the topic, okay, or the task. It also defines the goal for language learning. So the role of instructional materials within a method or instructional system will reflect decisions concerning to the primary goal of the materials. To present content, to practice content, to facilitate communication between learners, or to enable learners to practice content without the teacher's help, to form materials such as textbooks or computer softwares or the computer. Okay, so the last level of conceptualization and organization within a method is what we will refer to as the procedure. So this encompasses the actual moment-to-moment techniques, practices, and behaviors that operate in teaching a language according to a particular approach or method. It is the level at which we describe how a method realizes approach and design in classroom behavior. So essentially then, the procedure focuses on the way a method handles the presentation, the practice, and feedback phases of teaching. So the figure 2.1 below demonstrates the relationship between approach, design, and procedure, the final step in implementing a method. So on the revision and extensions of the original Anthony model, a method is theoretically related to an approach. So organizationally determined by a design and practically realized in procedure, which encompasses the classroom techniques, processes, behaviors, and use of, or observed. So for my conclusion, let us now turn to the major approaches and teaching methods that are in use today and examine them according to how they reflect specific decisions at the levels of approach, design, and procedure. So lastly, the references I use in the presentation, and you can use also for the future video. So that is my presentation all about, and thank you for listening.